Passages about preparation. The first passage is like one end of a bookend in time. The Exodus passage are the instructions of preparation given to Moses and Aaron, which they are to share to the Israelite people. This is our first Passover. And the instructions were to prepare the people for the coming of God's judgment upon the Egyptians, the coming of the death to those who had not been protected by the placing of the blood upon the door lintels and the doorposts. These instructions tell the people what to eat and how to eat. It tells them what to do with the lamb's blood, the blood that is shed to give them protection from death. Their people are told how to dress, to eat, for God knew that the people would have to move quickly after the Pharaoh had finally decided to release the people. The people were in fact dressed to travel. You dressed with your loins girded. That means you pulled up the low parts of your dressing gown, your robe, and you pulled it up around your waist so it wouldn't impede the movement of your legs, so that you could move quickly and not trip over your own robe. Your sandals were already on your feet. Your staff is already in your hand that you're going to use to help you to walk. This is probably where we got the first sandwich, made on flatbread, so that they could eat it quickly and even eat it on the move. Everything that they were told that night was in preparation for life, preparation for their life, and to move forward in their life with God. All of this preparation is to live as free people, the free people of God. This is the preparation for the people who will live as God, as their ruler. Then we see another Passover in our gospel passage. We consider this the opposite end of the bookends. This time Jesus is the one who's doing the preparing. He is preparing the disciples. Jesus knew his time was almost up. He knows how Judas's heart has been hardened and that Judas has already made arrangements to give him up to the authorities. But yet Jesus has time for one more lesson. A lesson on what it means to be a servant and what it means to be great. A servant of God to others. Picture with me, if you can, and imagine the scene. Maybe it's up here on the floor in front of us, and Jesus and his disciples are sitting and reclining at the table. They're eating what has been prepared for them by someone else, so we don't know who did the preparing of the food. It was just there. Jesus gets up from the table. He probably walked over to the door where there would have been a basin and a pitcher of water for the washing of feet. Jesus picks up these items and he walks back over to the disciples who were still reclining and sitting at the table. And Jesus takes off his outer robe and puts it aside, and he wraps a towel around himself, the same towel that he will use to dry the feet of the disciples. He begins to wash their feet. He was probably working his way around the table one at a time. And no one says anything until we get to Peter. And Peter protests his actions. Peter probably thinks it's beneath the dignity of his master to be washing the disciples' feet. He might even be wondering to himself, why didn't I wash the master's feet? Yet Peter didn't stop Jesus from washing the disciples' feet. He only protested when it came to himself. He didn't understand what Jesus was trying to teach him through these actions. And if you remember, before the disciples got to this table to eat, and as they had been walking along to come to this place for supper, they had been arguing about who would be the greatest. Jesus was preparing them for what it means to claim to be the greatest and who truly is the great. Jesus reminds Peter, unless I wash your feet, you have no part of me. Jesus was preparing them for their future calling as people who would bring good news of Jesus Christ to the world after the crucifixion. Jesus reminds them through his examples, through his words and actions, that the greatest is the one who serves, not the one being served. The disciples will become servants of Christ as they travel the world, bringing the message of salvation to the world. The disciples will be servants unto death for Christ, for all the disciples will be martyred. Jesus' washing of their feet is an illustration of servanthood, and it's a lesson also for us in our calling to be a child of God, to be a follower of Jesus the Christ. It's a lesson that reminds us also to be prepared to serve others. It seems so easy to forget the lessons we learn. If you think back on your school days, the lessons you probably remembered best are those that involve some interaction on your part. You probably can't remember too many of those long, boring lectures. But in those classes where the teacher let you touch and manipulate and use and play with, those lessons probably stick in your mind. Jesus' example was to stick in their mind. And then we come to our third passage, in which Jesus changes the Passover meal forever when he lifted that bread and passed around that cup containing the fruit of the vine. Paul reminds us, as he reminds the Corinthians, that he is passing down to them the actions that are to help us remember and to prepare us for our life with Christ. When Paul notes that he received this action from the Lord, he is reminding us Jesus prepared us for this on the night he met with his disciples for that Passover meal. What we do today was a reminder from more than 2,000 years ago. And now we continue to remember to celebrate that meal of the Lord's. Each time we join together, each time we participate, each time we share in Holy Communion as we did earlier tonight, we are reminded about how Jesus taught his disciples to serve. Each Eucharist minister, each acolyte who holds the cup and the bowl are serving others. They are doing as Jesus said and demonstrating in their examples of washing feet and serving communion to serve one another. Both Jesus and Paul remind us to remember all that Jesus did in his ministry. Each time we are engaged in Holy Communion, we are to remember the actions of Jesus the Christ. Each time we come to communion, we are reminded ourselves, I am a servant of Christ. I am called to serve others. I am not called to wait for someone else to serve me. Here at MCC of the Spirit, we prepare for our service with others. We gather for prayer before each service. Those who are involved in the service come together in a time of prayer. Before we serve communion, we have a time in which corporately, together, we confess our sins and confess our iniquities and ask for forgiveness before we partake of the meal. We have time, both individually and together, for our prayers. So therefore, I call upon you, church, you brothers and sisters of Christ, be prepared. Be prepared like your Hebrew ancestors who ate with their sandals on. Be prepared to serve one another just as Jesus served the disciples. Be prepared by always remembering all that Jesus has done in your life and the life of others around you. Amen.